to everyone one more time. I know we rescheduled this webinar last time around, so appreciate everyone's patience and willingness to be able to jump on here. We have some really cool topics ahead, as I said. And for those that are not able to join us this morning, we are going to be recording this webinar, and we will be sharing the recording, the deck, and some cool notes afterwards. So stay tuned for the recap. Perfect. So I think for the most part, we can go ahead and get started. We are about 9:05 here, or well, 5 minutes in for everyone, regardless of time zone. And so what are we talking about today, Fred? Kind of give me a little bit of an intro here on what do you think we're going to see today, and why is it important to keep the buyer's journey in mind as you're kind of working on your PPC campaigns? Just give me that kind of intro, nice little bite.
Yeah, I mean, so if you think about the buyer's journey, I think it's both gotten longer and shorter. People have these really long buyer's journeys when it comes to high ticket items. They have more resources at their disposal. They have many devices at their disposal. So it gets complicated. People love to do research and hop back and forth between their different devices, between social networks and search and Google and articles. And so kind of like staying on top of that can be challenging as an advertiser. And like you said, you have to understand what is that typical buyer journey going to look like, and what are the opportunities that you have to have touch points along the way to make sure that you're part of that consideration phase and ultimately also get the sale at the very end. These are sort of the buyer's journeys that get longer, but we've also seen them shortening. So how many of us haven't been on something like Instagram, and because it seems to know us so well, it shows us something that we weren't even thinking about buying, but we're like, well, it's cheap enough and it seems useful enough that I'm just going to click that button. And
You're
it's
describing me right now. You're basically describing my purchase pattern. Like I just see something, I was like, oh, that looks good enough. Just like at the cart. It's like impulse buy.
exactly right.
Impulse for sure.
So
Um,
yeah, that's what we're talking about.
so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So here's a little bit of the agenda for everyone ahead of time. So the first thing is understanding that buyer's journey. So we're just going to do a quick recap. This is, buyer's journey 101. So, what do you typically look for? What are the different stages, and kind of some practical examples around that. Then we're going to try to give you guys a walkthrough of attribution and bidding strategies. We're not going to tie them into the buyer's journey just yet, just kind of a quick overview and understanding of attribution and bidding. And finally, we're going to put it all together and say, okay, well, depending on this campaign type and such, here's potentially what kind of bidding strategy and measurement tools you would want to keep in mind in terms of getting the most out of your campaigns. And then finally, we're going to go through some tips and best practices that, Fred and I have there to be able to, give you guys something to take away with. So we're going to jump straight into understanding this buyer's journey. And as Fred was talking about, for some people, the buyer's journey has gotten a little longer. For some people, it's gotten a little shorter. I'll tell you a story about White Shirt, for example. Back in the day, and I'm talking about this maybe 8-10 years ago, our sales floor was so different than it is today. People would look for an advertising agency. They would call in, and do you know what our time to sell was? Like probably about 60 to 70% of our sales were same day deals. We would just close them right away. That's how quickly it was. So we could just get our campaigns up and running, do some lead gen for it. Our sales rep were ready to go, and that would be it. Now people have the ability to, first and foremost, and this changes from industry to industry, right? There's more competition. There's a lot more brands out there. There's a lot more to know about a particular product that you're buying. So you have to get educated about it. And so our time to sell has now actually gone much, much longer too, where we're now within that 3+ weeks in terms of consideration. So we have to build a lot of traction on those early stages because people are not ready to make a decision just yet. They're a little up above that. And so that's our job as marketers in this particular case, or an advertiser, to figure out how do I shorten it up a little bit, or how do I attack people at different stages here. And so I think it's kind of a nice, interesting story that I just wanted to share about how ours in particular has gone from, within a couple of days to now multiple weeks. Have you seen that, across other industries, Fred? Anything you'd like to share about that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I've seen it across. It's interesting because like I was working with this t-shirt company, And if you're thinking about buying a single t-shirt, obviously that buyer journey is pretty quick. But then they also do bulk orders. And so they're talking about selling 1,000 t-shirts to a company to be printed. And it's that exact same product, but the quantity, just put it into a buyer journey that's obviously much longer. And so that's what sometimes complicates it, right? Is understanding, yeah, it's not even product dependent, but it's like, who is that buyer? What are they doing with it? That changes that duration. And I think we can also talk about sort of the problem aware, solution aware. So a lot of people don't know that they have a problem. And that's kind of where that upper level funnel stage awareness comes in, where we can tell people, hey, well, you may have been doing your dishes the old fashioned way, but did you know there's a new towel that can make drying like 70% faster, like a new invention that you have, right? A new product that you're selling. And so now they're problem aware, and then now you take them down that funnel to, okay, they're looking for a solution. They know they have a problem. So now it's building that interest, and it's those different channels that you want to deploy along the way. It's an interesting game, fun game.
Absolutely. And I think you hit you hit the nail right on the head. And that is that for your existing customers, let's say, which you can typically sell to, for example, or people that are already kind of aware for you, that would be people right in this bottom area, which is people that already are familiar with your brand. They're just always going to be within that consideration or ready to move into a decision phase. So for example, me, giving some practical examples, like I'm a Nike guy, checks over stripes. So I am going to always be in that consideration phase for Nike products. So if Nike does a campaign for me, I am ready to go. And I just need to see one really cool product come up and I am ready to purchase. They launch new Metcons. I go to the gym all the time. I'm gonna buy those Metcons right away. Now, for a different person, let's say, for example, my soon-to-be wife, she's not very sporty. So for her, she sees a Nike ad and she's just like, okay, cool. I'm probably seeing it because I in some sort of a way, I'm related to Daniel. And his interest is going to kind of catch on into my audience, right? So there's some sort of like an audience signal there. But for her, this is just a little bit of awareness. So to her, it's not really going to be that interesting. She is going to need some sort of sports clothing, but she is not a Nike advocate. So she's not thinking of that brand. There's not a commitment there. So she's going to buy maybe on different things. She's going to buy maybe on price. She's going to buy maybe on, you're going to have to create a story around to be able to turn that buyer in. So essentially thinking of how to solve for this other, let's say, audiences that can broaden your reach. So if you're thinking of net new customers, thinking of investing in your interest and awareness stages and creating some awareness for people that are not familiar with your brand, they're not previous buyers, that's going to have a direct influence on how much net new you can eventually make, but it's going to take you a little bit of time. And I think we're going to jump into an example similarly to what I was speaking earlier about how white shirts like buying process has changed is you might be, let's say, for example, an advertiser today, you're a law firm, you're a dentist, etc. You're interested in buying or you're interested in improving your performance of your campaigns in general. You're getting some leads, but you're getting some leads every now and then. It doesn't really, your phones are not ringing all the time. And so what do you start doing? You start researching how you could potentially get some more traffic. But at this point, you're not necessarily set on what you want. So there's going to be that process. And again, for us, it's relatively simple to see it. We know that people are going to be aware that they have a problem. And like you very well pointed out, sometimes you don't even know you have a problem. You have it right here, but you haven't really decided to act on it. So be able to create some content that's educational, that is creating that's a little bit creative and storytelling, it's going to help you bring people from that awareness stage into now feeling like, oh, there is some interest here for me. Maybe pay-per-click or investing a little bit of advertising dollars on my media campaigns could be potentially interesting. And then once I'm there, I know that this is probably the action I want to take. So like back to my example of Nike shoes, like I know I want to go to the gym. So I'm just not familiar with what brands I should use. What kind of shoes should I get? I'm going to go into that research stage. So I'm going to probably Google, best shoes for women for the gym. And I'm probably going to try to find those best trainers. So I'm going to be in that interest, but I'm still researching a little bit more. And so that's what makes it so interesting, that we are now also more educated buyers. So we're going to need to do, especially, and again, there's different personas, but for instance, again, Melida, who is my soon-to-be wife, she's going to do at least at least 5 or 6 different brand comparisons. And she's just going to make absolute sure that this is the brand she wants to move forward with. And so that's when you can have the right copy at the right time will influence that consideration stage and then move it into the decision. So it's just such a fun kind of game. It's like a dance that you have to play with your buyers, and you have to know where they are, and you have to create content that's going to be very different. And what success looks like for each of those stages is also going to be different. And I think that's what makes it, for me, an always really, really fun task, especially with new customers for me. And anything, do you feel like that's kind of along the same ways that you see it, Fred?
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a couple of big brands here. I'm an Adidas guy, so I'm sorry to
Oh no,
differ
I'm
on the
sorry.
spectrum here, but you don't have to be sorry. I'm very happy. But so a lot of you are probably watching today aren't these huge brands, Nike and Adidas. And so awareness is especially important, right? Because if you're Adidas or Nike, you can sort of get away with the fact that you don't need to advertise on running shoes because people probably know that you sell running shoes. But what we're seeing lately is brands like Lululemon that were super popular in the sports fashion. They're actually having a hard time because there's so many new entrants coming into the market. And what they're doing is they are present on those early stage funnel steps, the awareness building. They're saying, hey, we're an alternative brand. Like now there's like tens of brands that sell the same kind of clothing as Lululemon, and they're able to move into that space because they're building that brand awareness. And so, but the risk is if you're not at those early stages, while somebody then is so dead set on, okay, I'm going to buy Nike, I'm going to buy Adidas, whatever the big brand is, they're going to go down that funnel. Then they're going to start doing really specific searches for that specific type of shoe, like the Metcon that you were mentioning. So if you're not in those early stages, people just don't know what your shoe is called or what your line of clothing is called, right? And you're going to lose them at that point. So especially as a smaller brand, awareness building is super important.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that for me is really important, I like this phrase and I say this to clients, it's like you want to be able to answer the question that haven't been asked in your potential buyers, right? And so they haven't really asked a question, you want to be there. Like you said, there isn't already a defined need per se, and so you want to be there and be able to showcase your product, showcase your services, and answer those questions. So now moving a little bit into what the point of this webinar is to be able to show you guys what is the right bidding strategy and objectives to measure on each of those different kind of buying funnel stages. But before we can do that, we need to understand, right, what is attribution? Because attribution is going to affect how you measure your results and how you define success. And then we're going to look into bidding strategy so that we understand what are the options that we have, and then try to be able to put it all together. And so when we talk about attribution, it's essentially such a hot word right now, Fred. Like if you were to go on Google Trends right now, it goes like this, because for the most part, attribution is such a difficult problem to solve today in the grand scale of things, but it's a very simple concept. And it's essentially the fact that buyers today, they're not going to be just on their computer. So I have my computer, I have my tablet, I have my phone. Those are my 3 kind of main ones. But at the same time, I also have my TV on my living room where we watch, different things. And there's also a connected TV there because we're going to be doing YouTube and stuff like that. So you could hypothetically say that I have 4 different places where I could be, where there could be interactions. And so attribution is a way to say that through these different touch points, you can essentially give a little bit of credit to each of the campaigns that influence what will eventually be either a buy or a meaningful action. So we used to have a lot, right? We used to have first click, linear, position based, all these fancy things. Now it's essentially last click or data driven. So either you give the full credit to the last click that took place, which, funny enough, a lot of systems still do. We used to use Pardot, by the way, from Salesforce, and Pardot does last click attribution by default. But so there's still a lot of different systems that use it, and technically speaking, it still has some sort of merit, if you will, for simplicity. But for the most part, data driven, what it does is it basically crunches down the different places. So if you had some image ads going on Meta, and then there was a search that was actually done, and then potentially maybe some email marketing. So all of those different touch points are going to be counting, and there's going to be, if you have one sale that was $100, you're essentially going to get some credit across, and there is a AI that figures out which of the steps has the most merit within leading into that conversion, right? And so you want to think of this attribution as a way for you to know what campaigns are being most influential in your buying funnel, right? That's essentially the easiest way to see that. Fred, do you feel like this is a concept that a lot of people struggle to like get across, or do you feel like it's very well cemented for most?
Yeah, I mean, I think you explained that really well, how it kind of gives weight across the different stages or connection points. It's really simplified because, like you said, Google has taken it down to it's mostly data driven. Now, last click is still an option, and I really caution against that because most of you are going to be using some sort of automated bidding. You're going to be using some sort of broad matching, which automatically goes and finds new search terms that might be relevant. The risk with last click is that if you only give value to the last thing in that journey, in that funnel, and we showed you the funnel, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that happens before you get to that final decision stage. If you give no value to the upper stages and you're not a huge, big known brand, that's where you lose the game because if you give no credit to those upper funnel activities, then the bidding system is going to say, well, none of this stuff at the beginning stages leads directly to a conversion, right? It leads eventually to a conversion, but not right at that very instant. And it's going to say, I'm not going to bid for that anymore. I'm not going to show your ads for that anymore. And so your funnel going from like big and wide at the top becomes narrower and narrower. And what comes out the bottom is also going to start drying up. So really caution against last click, even though that is still an option. I really wouldn't be using that.
Yeah, I think you hit the hit. You said that very well. And like I said, I think there's still a lot of tools that use this. And I've seen it across the board. It's one of the first things that we check for. For instance, when we're doing audits, that's one of the first things that we check. And I imagine, for instance, like with Optimizer, you guys probably encourage also data-driven attribution and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's Optimizer is kind of an agnostic tool. We let you
Yeah.
manage the account the way that you want it to be managed. So if you want to do last click, that's fine. But we basically use your conversion data as it comes out of Google to tie the different components together. But yeah, personally, my recommendation is manual bidding is not something you should be wasting time on. And if you're going to be using automated bidding of any kind, then you need a more sophisticated attribution model. And so what we're looking at here now is the plethora of bidding options that you have across the different ad platforms. And it can be a little bit overwhelming, right? So I don't think we're going to talk through each one of these, but the point is, and I liken this in the book that I wrote. So I wrote a book about digital marketing in an AI world. And basically the concept is that with so much automation, like what is your role as the human? And so you as the PPC expert looking at this schematic of the many ways that you could do automated bidding or manual bidding, figuring out what is the right kind for the scenario that you have for your customer, for your client. You are the PPC doctor. You're looking at this schedule of medicines. What's the right medicine to ail or to solve what ails your customer? And so many options here. And we're going to talk a little bit more specifically in the coming slides about which ones we would use at different stages of the funnel.
Absolutely. And I think, as you very well said, is just to illustrate the different options that you have. So like if you're an advertiser and you're going under, or even if you're an agency that may be starting out, you're very strong in other areas, but you're just now getting into the world of Google Ads and Meta, you're going to be faced with this choice. And for the most part, what you want to do is just think, okay, well, it's going to depend. And that's what we're going to show you. But you have the ability to do fully manual and you have the ability to do automated based on different things that you want. And so it's based on, for example, how on average, how much do I want to spend on a single meaningful action? Do I want to be focused on what is my return on ad spend on general? Do I want to focus more on volume? Do I want to focus more on traffic? And so those are some of the questions you're going to ask yourself. And there's no better strategy than the one that suits that specific funnel stage the best. And that's exactly what we're going to cover today. Now, I made it's a little relatively less choices, but still very similar concepts between them, which is, do you want to focus on volume? Do you want to focus on value? Do you want to focus on being mindful around cost? Do you have some limits that you want to establish? And so for the most part, you'll have very similar choices as you're kind of navigating through that. So now your importance here, and as you were saying, Fred, is you're the driver, right? And so you have this car, which is going to be a combination of that AI and obviously the setup of the campaigns that you've created. And so for the most part is how do you measure success? And measuring success here is going to be based on potentially leveraging your attribution, choosing the right conversion actions, and then of course choosing the right bidding strategy to be able to get the maximum input from your campaigns. And so that's what we're going to be looking into. You want to be able to, in short, what we're trying to tell you is every single step of that funnel is important, and you want to be able to fuel each of those steps so that you have a relatively well designed and very healthy width at each of those funnel stages, because the wider those top funnels are going to be, obviously that is going to have some sort of a good correlation into how wide that bottom part of the funnel is going to be. So just make sure you value each of those correctly. And so again, when you're working on that top on the awareness, what kind of campaigns can I create? For example, what can I measure a success for here? And so for instance, we were talking about the awareness. Maybe we're just trying to get people to sign up for a newsletter. Maybe we're just trying to get them to learn more about, let's say, what we do and what services we provide. And then we're going to be tailoring down a little bit further and move from that conversion action into a conversion action that would actually be purchases, right? So we're going to go into, in the next slides are going to be focused on essentially going through each of the funnel stages, and then we're going to give you our recommendations on doing that. But the general sense is understanding that there's different conversion actions you can measure. And if you guys recall, for example, we have conversion actions that can be around purchases, around leads, they could be around key page visits, they could be around small subscriptions like newsletters, etc. And so you have to understand all the different things that you can measure, because that's what's going to be able to help you drive success.
Exactly. And another small point on that is you have these many conversion actions that you can choose, like Daniel's saying, but also remember that within Google Ads, you can associate those at the MCC account or campaign level. So it really does give you the control to say, like, here's one campaign that I exclusively want to use to drive email newsletter signups. And that's fine. That's the only thing that that campaign and the automated bidding associated will look at, right? But you can also say, well, at the end of the day, I do want to drive actual sales, not just newsletter signups. So maybe you have an MCC level multi-account conversion event, which is for sales. And then you put data-driven attribution together with that. And now it measures everything across every stage of that buyer's journey. And it gives a little bit of credit to the early stages, and it gives some credit to the lower stages. And at the end of the day, it knows where that value is really coming from and helps you build a bigger funnel overall.
Absolutely. And I think that mix and matching is what really defines success for us. So for example, let's say we're going to talk about awareness campaigns. So there's different campaigns that we're going to have, right? And so specifically within Google, you might be choosing a demand gen campaign, which was launched. And I don't know about you, Fred, but I absolutely love my demand gen campaigns. They are what display wanted to be for a degree, because I think the level of like spammy sites just obviously it's gone, right? So there's a lot less of that. At least I am a big proponent of those, at least for now, especially for that top level awareness and interest campaign building. So you could do a demand gen campaign, and then now what is going to be your ideal conversions here? For example, like we said, maybe there's some key pages that you want. Maybe you want to drive, for example, engagement towards a newsletter subscription. And so what is your conversion goal in that particular case? And then what we would recommend, for example, in terms of bid management here for a demand gen campaign, especially if you're on the awareness stage, I would argue actually that you would probably kind of be really, really well on just max conversions or max clicks, for instance. I would probably say, depending on what you have, if you have just a key page, I would say you could do maximize clicks. But if you do have, for example, again, you're trying to create as much newsletter signups as possible, I would do maximize conversions, focus on that demand gen, and try to get as many newsletter signups. Because, for instance, if you're e-commerce or if you're retail, having a big email database is huge for you. And so being able to convert people into subscribers or into page likers is going to give you the flexibility to then market to them in the future. So you would probably say that a meaningful action for you in that awareness stage is to be able to get those email signups. So for example, that would be, you would create the campaign, that would be one of your actions. And then you would say maximize conversions could be potentially one of the ways in which you can do it. Similarly, for example, for YouTube, you're still trying to drive some awareness and consideration. One thing that we don't have here, but I think is really key, it's messaging. So your messaging would be aligned towards an educational component or just an awareness component. There's some soft CTAs. There's no buy now on that YouTube video by any means. It's more just like, here's how cool our product is, for example. And then again, in this particular case for YouTube, instead of focusing on, revenue, you could focus just in general on making sure you have as much impressions as possible. Fred, is there anything you don't see here that you'd like to add into that conversation?
I mean, I think you covered it really well there, but if you also think about social networks or demand gen campaigns, there's a lot more need for freshness of content. So if you're going to be hitting the same person again and again with sort of like that early stage message, vary it up, right? Because people don't want to see a post that they've already seen before. So that's not going to work well. Whereas if you think about search or display advertising, it is okay to have the same message. We've had messages that have worked for 10 years that you put on search ads, because ultimately when somebody goes and looks for that keyword, that is a great ad with a great call to action. That's super useful. You're not trying to get them interested at that point. They're already interested. They're just looking for the link to go and do that thing they want to do. So there's a little bit of a difference in philosophy there as far as the ad creative that you put in place. And then the other really important point that I think you covered, but like to point it out one more time, it said there at the bottom, you really have to think about your conversion volume. So if you don't have at least 50 conversions over a 30-day period, automated bidding is just not going to work that well. So then you have to either figure out, how do I put in place a different kind of conversion that does have enough volume? So that could be, instead of tracking a sale, maybe you track add to cart or something that comes before the actual sale. Or you just switch to a more manual bid management type to just get more data to feed the machine and the machine learning algorithms that eventually will take over and do the automated bidding for you.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly right. I mean, we were just working on an audit for one account that was coming on board, and they were doing gloves, like cooking gloves. And for the most part, they were really having a hard time getting some revenue in. So we started with some campaigns on demand gen, and we also did a PMAX campaign for them. And so what we were looking into at the time was that we had add to cart to secondary. So what we did is we focused on switching the add to cart to primary, so that we could at least just get as much volume of add to cards, which we felt was kind of a nice little in between of that end goal of the purchases. But again, I think that for the add to cart specifically, and I think we'll come back to that, that would be kind of more in that bottom consideration decision. But as you said, like the moral of the story here is, if these are going to be on the awareness and interest, make sure you pick a conversion action that is going to have a good frequency. They're going to happen repeatedly. The complexity to get that action from a customer is relatively low. So again, for instance, instead of saying book an appointment, it's just a newsletter. They just have to give you the email address. It could be, for example, and there's also things that you can do as an advertiser to facilitate that. So if you're trying to drive that newsletter, just say get 10% of your first purchase if you just get your email address or get your phone number in, so you can get some subscribers. So that's kind of one way in which you can incentivize it and grow that number. And then eventually the automated bidding will help you kind of take the charge. Now, the second part that we want to talk about here is very similar. So I think awareness and interest, there's some sort of an overlap in there. Some people see it as a 3-stage, some people see it as 4 stages, but it's very similar. So now people know that you exist. People know that there's a problem that you solve. And now what you're trying to make sure of is that that is a problem that is of interest to them. And so I now know that Nike exists and that they make shoes, or that Lululemon actually happens to make shoes now. I know that. Okay, well, why is that interesting to me? How would that potentially be interesting to me? Like, how can Lululemon turn me from being a Metcon guy into now being more of using their trainers? I like their clothes, but I'm not sure if I would buy their shoes. So this is kind of where key messaging is going to come into play. And so it's going to be a combination of your messaging with figuring out the right goals. And again, in this particular case, for example, at that point, there's, again, figure out what is a good conversion, what is a good step that you would feel like can get you some volume here. And the campaigns are going to be within that YouTube again. And so what you'll notice is there is some overlap. I do want to clarify. So there's some overlap in saying that demand gen can work at the awareness stage. It can work on the interest. It could also work on consideration. What's going to change here is you can change that goal that you're optimizing for. So perhaps earlier you wanted to optimize for key page visits. So if you have a pricing page or something like that, you want to track that. Here it could be something where there's some exchange of information, so there's less, and so it's indicative of something else that's happening that's very valuable to you. And again, you want to pick that bid management to be more around potentially volume as opposed to something that would be more on, let's say, more profit oriented or anything like that. So very similar. Messaging is key. That's kind of the key takeaway, I would say, in terms of interest. Like, what, Fred, in your opinion, like, what would you say is the biggest difference between interest phase and awareness phase?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like you said, right? So it's you're now aware that you have a problem, and now you're researching what you're going to do to solve that problem. And so you've identified that your sneakers for the gym are a little bit old. You probably want a new pair. So now you start researching it, and you start looking at, are there new brands? Is Metcon still the Nike shoe that you want, or have they come out with something newer? And so you're kind of in that exploration phase. Yeah, and so then I think it also, again, then when we think about the type of ad, it's no longer about letting people know they have a problem, but just sort of exposing what are the different potential solutions that your brand offers that might be a good match. So from a messaging perspective, it also shifts slightly to a more specific answer already.
Absolutely. And I think that's going to be what really makes the difference here is making sure that you have different messaging. And I think you said that, and it really is a good point. And that is that the at refresh frequency, once again, is very, very key here on awareness and interest, making sure that you are changing that copy on a regular basis to keep your buyers engaged. And so I think with Meta, you can set up some frequency caps as well, I believe. And so there's a couple things that you could do around that. You were going to say
The other
something.
thing I was The other thing that made me think of was in-market audiences, right? So now that user has started exploring different sneakers. So now you can go to many of the ad platforms and say, show my ads to in-market audiences for this type of product. And so that's where you can now insert your new brand that the customer may not have been aware about quite yet and show them all of these things. So I don't know what your Instagram is like, Daniel, but I certainly see a lot of like workout shorts and shoes, and it just knows that those are the types of things I also enjoy buying, and I constantly get exposed to new brands because they are using audience signals at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, unfortunately for me, my Instagram is full of restaurants and cat toys and accessories. That's a little bit of what describes my Instagram feed, but that's what I'm in the market for, just eating and buying new toys for my cats. And I think that kind of leads into the next section, which is consideration, right? So now I am ready to take that next step. I am almost ready. I now am going to narrow it down. I'm going to have my top competitors. So like my top options are now, I've narrowed it down from not knowing which brands I was interested in to now knowing I have 2, 3 top brands. So making sure that you stay top of mind. And I think this is one of the key parts that really resonates with the 3 of these top ones, which is awareness, interest, and consideration, but specifically with consideration to me is out of sight, out of mind. So I can't stress it enough. Like if that person is interested, you want to make sure that you are staying top of mind, that if you make sure you have your branded campaign on search, if you don't have it already, and that's going to convert quite a bit. And a lot of people are going to give branded campaigns a bit of a bad rep, but I mean, for the most part, is they're so good because people already know you, but don't discredit what happened to be able to create that awareness, especially if you're not such a known brand within that particular product or service. Your awareness and interest should lead, if you did it correctly, to an increase in your brand traffic. And that's why we also had it earlier in one of the slides, which is you could do a brand lift study. I mean, depending on how much you spend, of course, if you're spending a little bit less, you might not be able to do that. But essentially, think of it this way: if you were able to execute correctly, you were able to turn that awareness into interest, and now they've seen your brand repeatedly. that should convert into some search traffic specifically with your brand. Not only with your brand, but that's where that could also kind of take place. And I think at this point, you're already focusing more on that either purchase, on that lead generation, if you're a lead generation client. And so those are going to be kind of, this is how you're transitioning into that consideration phase. And so you'll see very similar campaign types on consideration and decision. We're going to be with back to search, back to shopping, back to video action. One thing that I think could be really helpful here, for instance, Fred, as a tip is if you're in that consideration decision, if you're consideration, you might be able to get away with some more like broad match keywords and allow kind of that bidding algorithm to, get in some new customers that were potentially not going to be typing specifically what you think they were going to type in. And I think that this is kind of where that fits in. Whereas in your decision, you can maybe be a little bit more restrictive with your match types and things like that. I think that could potentially be kind of a good way to see it. I don't know about you, but my search terms now are at least 7 words long. I make up the weirdest search terms. And so I am guilty of pushing advertisers into broad because I put myself in the shoes of a buyer. And I'm like, if I'm typing in 7 search, this like really, really long, weird searches, I can only imagine what other people are doing. And I feel like I'm kind of in the middle. I'm not super crazy, but I don't know. How do you feel that fits in?
Well, I think this should be a drinking game. Whenever Google gets up on stage and says 20% of searches are unique in the last 90 days,
Right? Yeah.
have you heard that stat before? That is a stat that they've been using for, I think, the last 20 years. Every time they have a major event, they mention that stat, which is why it should be a drinking game to but yeah, I mean, so it's exactly to the point that you made, right? It's you can't predict exactly what somebody's going to type in when they're coming and searching for your thing. So definitely have those broad matches running. I think this is also a good stage to add extensions and to have structured data. So if you're doing shopping ads, make sure your promotion feed is connected. If you're running other ads, make sure you have extensions with special promotions and attributes of your products, because in that consideration phase, they haven't made the decision yet. So anything you can do to say, hey, we've got a bigger discount, we got faster shipping, we got better availability, we got more colors of the latest Metcons, that's gonna tip the scales in your favor potentially.
Yeah, I think you have a great point there with the extensions. And I think there were a couple of new things that were coming out right now in GML, specifically around how to add some more of those little cool things into your shopping feed if you're a retailer. So they were actually pretty focused on retailers in terms of like changes at the GML. I don't think I saw a lot of things for lead gen guys. So lead gen guys, you're not forgotten about. It's just, I guess, the retail guys have a lot more going on for them, at least right now. But there were cool things like the virtual tryout and the 360. Those were kind of cool things to be able to showcase your product really well. So I think that was nice.
Yeah, and then let me sidetrack here for a minute, right? But this whole point about lead gen being deprioritized supposedly at GML, the fact is Google got up on stage and said that 50%, I believe, of advertisers who do lead gen, B2B lead gen, have not connected their CRM first-party data to the ad platform. So what they continuously keep doing, the majority of them, is they say, oh, somebody filled out the form on my page. That's a lead, that's a conversion. And that's where they stop, right? But we all know that a lot of those leads are junk leads. They're not good leads.
Yeah.
And the quality of those leads, that lives in your CRM, that lives in your HubSpot or your Salesforce or whatever system you happen to be using. The biggest thing that you can do by far to improve your performance is to feed that CRM data back to Google. And there's mechanisms to do it, right? So stop asking for like cool, new, shiny things when the vast majority aren't even doing that first party data integration correctly. Now, of course, the ones of you who are doing this correctly, I feel your pain when there isn't that new shiny thing. For the vast majority of people, like there's a quick solution here that's much more effective than some of these maybe things that look cool but aren't going to have as much of an impact.
Yeah. And I think they did technically bring in their data manager. So it's now officially live. It used to be in beta before, in a closed beta. So now it's live. And I think it looks pretty cool, at least for me. It has the ability to connect to some of the, let's say, known data sources, so you can pull in some stuff. But I think that one thing that I think defines the majority of the lead gen clients, sorry, but like you said, we're going a bit of a tangent here, but I think that where a lot of lead clients struggle is their technical skill set. They're not very technical. And I think it's almost inherent that the retail guys have some sort of a tech person assigned in their team. Like they know it gets complicated, so they have that designated person.
Yeah.
Whereas the Legion guy is more just like, oh yeah, my leads are in a spreadsheet, I'm covered. And I think that's a little bit of what describes that. And I think you said it very well. Like this is what the buyer journey mapping is about. If you were to draw out the buyer journey to bring it back into the webinar, you have traffic, then there's a lead generation form, but then there's still steps that need to take place. We were just working with a university out of Florida, and they were stopping at the first messaging conversion. So they had some campaigns on Meta. They were tracking, messenger conversions, which is new messaging conversation started, and that was it. And for them, it was very challenging, and that's part of the audit that we're doing. Is it was very challenging for them to know what happened after that, what the quality was. But there was still so much that needed to happen. Like number one, whether it was the right budget, whether it was pre-qualified, whether that person would go through and pick a career that they offered. Like there's so much that goes through. And if you can feed that data back into the algorithm as an offline conversion, you can now optimize for that. And that's essentially what the decision phase is going to be, and that consideration phase is going to be. You need some input on what else is happening, especially for Legion people, what is happening offline that is influencing that buy, because you need to be able to send that. Let's say, for example, for a university, maybe for them, like the process could go on more than 90 days. And so I get maybe you're not going to be able to get that last one, but find what's a good kind of middle step. So if they've already completed their application and they meet the financial requirements, great. That's fair enough. You can feed that back and you can say that those were qualified applicants, or let's say pre-approved. And then now you can optimize towards that. You can figure out what is your average value for each of those. And you can go from there. So there's so much that you can do if you take the time to work on feeding information back either to Meta, to Google. There's APIs that do that. Zapier does it if you don't have a way to like integrate it. So there's a couple of nifty things that you can do. And I think we could do a whole webinar on just specifically like offline conversion strategies and how to measure that and how to figure out the best way to track that. But I think you said it very well. There's so much that is underutilized in terms of like the offline conversions, but that's really what your goal should be here is dollars. And that's what the decision phase is going to be. So if you're doing, I mean, I think we missed the shopping one here, but if you're in that last decision phase, search campaigns, shopping campaigns, if you have a PMax with your product feed, I think you can do that. But I still feel a little kind of 50-50 about that one. I would probably stick to the shopping campaign. If you're doing Meta, you could do your product feeds as well. So like the objective here is dollars. So think of that being your final decision stage. And for the majority of people, you're going to be able to do that easily if you have a feed. If you don't have a feed, if you're a lead gen, again, make sure that you have some. This should not be ideally measuring primarily just like online leads. This stage should be some sort of an offline lead if you're a lead gen person.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. So I think it's been fun so far. Hopefully people were able to see a good grasp of how you can tackle buyers at each of the stages of the funnel. Like we said, we have different campaign steps that you can do. There's different app formats, for example, for Google, where you could be. I'm a big fan of the Explore page. I check it. It's a big thing for me. That's where I get the majority of my news, and that's where I get the majority of my ads as well. So don't do a whole lot of search and I think this is your slide, Fred. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about what's going on here?
Yeah, what's going on here? So sorry, I didn't put the build on this slide, but I think we've covered quite a bit about what campaigns should you have, what attribution, what conversion tracking. And so that's all very like implementable right after this webinar. But I also did want to mention something about generative AI because which talk would be complete without talking about generative AI these days. But I think it really is going to change how people behave and the consumer journey. It's not going to look the same a couple of years from now as it does today. And I think that's driven by these types of devices. So I've got my AI glasses here from Facebook. These are the Meta glasses. They have little cameras in them. And so I can be wearing this into a store and I can say, hey, Meta, take a look at this couch and, tell me which designer it might be from or find me other price points. But if you think about these things, it's like these generative AI assistants are becoming our memory. And so 2 weeks later, after having used my glasses to walk around Macy's and maybe look at some furniture that I liked, I can go to Google and I could say, hey, remember that couch that I looked at? What store was that in again? Who was the designer? And so the types of searches that I'm now able to do are completely different from the ones that I would do today because I no longer have to remember who the designer was or the store. Like all of that memory exists in my generative assistant. And so that really, I think, is going to be a huge shift. Like for a long time, I've not believed that keywords were dead. Now I start to believe that keywords in the form that we know them today really are dead because it's going to be a conversation. It's going to, like you said, you're going to 7-word queries on average. Well, now imagine it's no longer a 7-word query, but it's you having a literal like 30-second conversation with an assistant that identifies what is the thing you want to go and buy. And so I just think start being ready for this, right? And start talking to your clients about how will consumers behave with these assistive buttons, with these cameras that they're wearing constantly, with the Gen AI, this is the Chat GPT that you can put on your desktop. It's literally able to watch your screen as you browse the web. And that goes into the memory, and that's going to help it later on connect you to the things that you are interested in. And it's going to know your preferences. So it's going to steer you in a certain direction. And that's really going to change the game for us.
I definitely have. You tried the Apple Vision one yet?
I have the Apple Vision Pro. It's not quite as useful from a generative AI
Okay.
perspective. It's certainly a fun device to watch movies. It's a bit heavy still. But like honestly, I mean, listen, these glasses, they're normal glasses. Nobody can tell there's cameras in them. And I can be like, hey, Meta, take a look at this screen and summarize it for me. And it goes into the memory. And like later on, if I need that information, it's in my assistant. And that's crazy cool to me, right? Like these are glasses I would wear anyway. And now they help me remember stuff.
I think that it's such an interesting thing. And I think they, at the GML, for instance, Google talked a lot about visual search, and not only visual search like through, this devices that you wear, but also the same thing like visual search with your phone. I find myself similar, to what you were saying. It's like just kind of pointing my camera at stuff and going the AI lens and then trying to do a search around that. And so how do you make sure that you're there, that you show up there? How can you be creative enough with your campaign setup to show up for advertisers that are, sorry, not for advertisers, for buyers who are now essentially doing non-conventional searches and non-conventional interactions, which will very, very quickly become the new norm of how, people interact with your brand. So stay with it, and I think it's we're all in for a really, really fun next couple of years with how this is going to affect how we essentially create our advertising campaigns and how we win new business. It's going to be really, really cool. All righty, so we are essentially out of time. So we are going to move into some potential questions here. Let me see if we have any on the Q&A really quick. 1 second. Where is my
So we had a question there from Jehan. Thanks for the valuable information. In your experience, Daniel, which converts better for lead gen? Following the traditional funnel from awareness to decision, or creating campaigns only for leads that are almost ready to convert?
I would say for lead gen, it depends on the budget that you have. I would say that more often than not, when we get clients that have relatively lower budgets, we're going to try to focus on, that bottom funnel. But when we have a little bit more flexibility, and especially, again, if the client's flexible and we're able to kind of work out their objectives, I would say having some additional campaigns earlier on in the funnel, it's a good way to make sure you create some good awareness. I think it's also very much industry dependent. So for example, for some industries, you might be able to do more like if you're landscaping, for example, or if you're in the construction sector, like HVAC, et cetera, like trying to create some ads on, demand gen potentially can be a little strange, I would say, or not, conventional, so to speak. So, depending on the industry for what your lead generation could be, different campaign types are going to kind of fall in more naturally than others. Back to the example of lead gen, if you want to think of a university that we were working with, they're still lead gen by definition. And what we were working with them is we did some campaigns around demand generation, which kind of mimics social media, which is what they were very heavy on. I like to think of demand gen as like the social media of Google, so to speak, in a certain way, right? Because it's still going to get positions on Explore, YouTube, and other placements. And so that's what we did. So we did some demand gen campaigns for them, and the focus was to be able to create some interest in different events that they were promoting. They do a lot of webinars and stuff, so we were doing advertising campaigns for that, and not specifically for the submission just yet, just to create some awareness. And we did some video ads as well for them. So video works really, really well too. Just the video campaigns on their own. And all of that led to having a really strong presence on our search campaigns and stuff like that. And quick tip, I mean, if you have the data, one of the things that really worked well for us on that, especially, I wouldn't say not necessarily on that kind of attraction or awareness phase, but specifically a little kind of in the middle, we were able to remarket to previous list of either customers or people that they were in market for. So we were able to kind of upload that. And with demand gen, you can still do direct targeting. For PMAX, it doesn't necessarily work that way. It's more like a signal, so it's not exactly the same. It's more of like, hey, here's who I like, kind of find more people like this. Whereas on demand gen, it would be literally targeting that. So I would say industry dependent, budget dependent, but those are some of my tips for you. Fred, does that kind of resonate with you a little bit?
Yeah, it does. And let me jump into the next question, which is a bit related, and I'll start with that one. But Ariel is asking, if you don't have a big budget, do you recommend to prioritize conversions? And so obviously, right? I mean, I think both questions kind of go to the fact that where are you going to put your budget first? If you have a small budget, obviously you put it at the bottom of the funnel because that's going to look like the most measurable. Even remarketing is going to look like it's driving great results. Brand keywords are going to drive much lower CPAs, much better ROAS than non-brand. But I think the question that you ultimately want to think about is what's the incrementality of what you're achieving here? So, if you're doing remarketing, the only reason that remarketing works is because you had someone come to your website to do something, and that put them on a cookie list, which then enabled you to show ads to them as they did other stuff on the internet. How did they come to you in the first place? Was that an SEO effort that a colleague of yours drove? And are you now just monetizing that traffic? And is that incremental to what would have happened anyway? Like, would they have found you some other way if it wasn't for the brand ad or the remarketing ad? And that's really the question, right? You have to have a justifiable and a defensible story. When you go into your boss, whoever's paying the bills to an agency, you have to tell them that story. And hopefully that story is that you've actually driven some incremental conversions that would not have happened without your efforts. And so that's where I would caution against going too deeply down the funnel and only spending money there, because you do need that upper funnel activity, right? And you need to have a story that you can go to the boss with to say like, oh yeah, we should continue to fund the agency and the PPC campaigns as well.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there. And like I said, every industry is going to be a little bit different. Every situation is going to be a little bit different. Some clients, they don't have any previous history, or some clients are maybe in a really challenging industry where the CPCs are really high. And then, a search campaign, which is the bottom of the funnel, really probably won't pan out for you. So they have no brand and their keywords are really expensive, $30, $40 CPC, and then they have a $50 budget. It's like, so at that point, it's about maybe considering other options and evaluating whether or not this would be kind of a good approach for you or not, or perhaps maybe doing something on Meta could be maybe a little bit more down to earth for them, and a little bit more kind of within reason. So always keep the clients business goals in mind. At the end of the day, it has to make financial sense for them. They have to, like Fred said, incrementality is a big thing here, but in general, just making sure that that money is, well spent for them is kind of the most important part of doing this. Good. Do we have any more questions on there?
I think those are the main ones. I think we're pretty, I mean, I'd love to talk about Performance Max a little bit, but I don't think we have time for that in these 2 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think we have enough time in there, but it's been so fun. And again, kind of the overarching message that we were saying is understand your buyer journey, and I don't mean it from like an awareness decision, like we drew it out. Like I mean literally map out what are the touch points that lead into that sell. So like there's a website visit, then this happens, and then once the lead form comes in, I do this, and then what are those steps? Because then you can assign and understand how much conversion rate happens from each to those. What is your drop off? Where do you need to influence more? Maybe your drop off is too high on a certain level, so you want to be able to retarget those. Figure out your buyer journey, not from just the buyer funnel, the 4 stages, but also from your individual situation down to your industry and your specific use case. And then try to create your campaigns around facilitating where you need the most help, where you need the biggest boost. And obviously, naturally, we're always going to think of the bottom funnel. But as Fred said, if you just focus here, that looks like a very narrow funnel, and you want to make sure you widen that funnel out so that you can make sure you get more throughput. And incrementality here is going to be the big game. So, Fred, I cannot thank you enough for having joined us today. It's been an honor. You are one of the brightest in the game. So thank you so much for giving us a little bit of time. To everyone that attended, thank you so much. Fred, any words? Where can people find you? Obviously, they already know, but you go for it and you do that. You do.
Yeah, okay. Well, follow me. I'm Silicon Vallaeys on X. I'm also on LinkedIn, and obviously my company is Optimizer, spelled in a funny way. But if you need some help with PPC management from a software perspective, that is what we do. Got a free trial, so check it out. This stuff is fun, but can be challenging, and so tools and technology, we put that in place because we want you at the end of the day to have some free time. Like for Daniel, so he can go to the gym, so he can play with his cat, so he can find a woman who wants to marry him. Congratulations, by the way, Daniel, on that. That's very exciting. But yeah, that's why we run Optimizer. And thanks everyone for watching.
All right, we're going to close it today, guys. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. We'll send the recording very, very shortly. Bye-bye.